that was very specific, and it was a practice of war back then, and it has always been a practice of war, which is to desecrate the bodies as a means of psychologically breaking down your enemies, to crucify or to desecrate the bodies or to make an example out of them as a means of breaking down your enemy's psychology. That is something that the Prophet ﷺ particularly prohibited. And there's a wisdom to that that's very obvious, that it contradicts everything about the rahmah of the Prophet ﷺ, about the mercy of the Messenger ﷺ. But what about when it's done to us? And so I wanted to kind of analyze through the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ how he taught the companions to deal with gruesome imagery that was right in front of them. And sometimes it just means analyzing some of the very specific incidents of the seerah that we're already familiar with, but through that particular lens. So for example, when you hear about Sumayyah radiallahu ta'ala anha and the means by which Abu Jahl martyred her, right? It's a very nasty form of literally tearing through her body, right? With a spear through her midsection. Someone has to pick up the pieces, right? And has to sort of come to terms with that. And you can imagine the specific test to the faith of those that have to put the pieces back together, right? Of the first martyrs of Islam and what that can do to someone and how that can shut someone off. And subhanAllah, one of those incidents, and I start with this for a reason, is the incident of Khabbab ibn al-Arat radiallahu ta'ala anhu himself. Because Khabbab himself was a victim of a heinous crime which made it very hard to look at him. And that is that everywhere from the back of his head all the way down to his lower back, the skin was completely burned off. It was completely melted off. Why? Because his master used to torture him in Islam by taking burning hot coal, and she would run it down the back of his head, all the way down his neck, all the way through his back, to where if you looked at him, it immediately struck you. Now imagine the people looking at Khabbab, and imagine Khabbab himself. Now consider the hadith that is very well known in regards to the subject that we are discussing today. And that is the very famous hadith that Khabbab says that we complained to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we said to him, "Ala tastansir lana, ala tad'u lana." Will you not seek victory for us? Will you not make dua for us? Will you not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hurry up and conclude this affair for us? It's getting too much for us. It's getting too difficult for us. And look at what's happened to me, and look at what's happening to my brothers, my sisters, from the mustada'afin, from the weak ones of Mecca, the slaves of Mecca, who are getting the brunt of it because they had no way to protect themselves in this moment. And what did the Prophet ﷺ do? The Prophet ﷺ spoke directly to the root of the matter, which was that the imagery can blur perspective. The imagery and the pain can blur the ultimate reward that you are seeking. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, immediately, قَدْ كَانَ مَنْ قَبْلَكُمْ يُؤْخَذُ الرَّجُلُ فَيُحْفَرُ لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيُجْعَلُ فِيهَا. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that before you, there used to be a people where a man would be put in the ground and buried halfway. He's going to give you a very specific image, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَيُجَاءُ بِالْمِنْشَارِ فَيُوضَعُ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ فَيُجْعَلُ نِصْفَيْنِ. Can you imagine? The Prophet ﷺ said that the practice of this people was that when someone would become Muslim, they would bury them halfway in the ground and they would slice them into two. And the ulama said, this way and this way, as a means of making an example out of them. Meaning what? That there was a group of believers that came before you that lived a very difficult time. And can you imagine the psychological torture of seeing their brothers and seeing their sisters sliced into two?